Hello there. Welcome to the stream. It is time for this week's podcast. My apologies. I was supposed to do this on Monday, but because of reasons, I just had a few meetings and some other stuff that got in the way. So I'm recording this on Thursday evening, and at least here in the Netherlands. So glad to see you. Feel free to join the chat room and enjoy the show. I'll be back to the chat after I'm done recording the show. So if you post any comments or questions that you want me to react to, then don't worry, I'll get to it.
Do you need a break?
You read my mind.
Come with me.
Come with me as we enter the first week of Lent. I am Father Roderick, I'm a priest and I'm a geek, and I love to share with you everything I'm passionate about, from Lent and my faith to the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Marvels, and so much more. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'm very excited because today I sent my first diary entry of the Diary of a Media Priest. This is a newsletter that I've been working on for about 2 weeks now. I've been preparing this, and I created a whole new website for people to sign up, and then I had to train myself to write a short story every day. And today I send out the first batch of emails. I post these things both in Dutch and in English. And the English newsletter went out to about 1,300 people, I think, and the Dutch one to about 300, 400 people. Now, those are very old mailing lists that I built up many years ago, so we'll probably get a few bounces, and I still have to somehow integrate everyone that has subscribed to my Patreon community, so that they too can receive these posts. And the reason that I'm excited about is this is something I love adding to my repertoire. Of course, I'm a podcaster. I love to post videos on TikTok and on YouTube, but I also love to write, and I love to write about the same stuff that I talk about in my videos and in my podcasts. And so today I posted a story about Tolkien and his aversion to Lent. Now, this was very surprising to me when I did some research to discover that Tolkien, who was actually a very devout Catholic, really didn't like Lent. And I felt a bit vindicated because Lent is not my favorite time of the year either. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a segment later on in this show, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. If you've received this email newsletter, love to hear your feedback. And if you're interested, I will post a link to the sign-up page for this Diary of a Media Priest in the show notes. So hopefully in a couple of weeks from now, we can share all these entries and these stories with an even larger audience. But I feel like it's an accomplishment. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. I've been working on this new website for months now, several months now, and it's finally coming together. Every day there is progress. And I hope that by Easter, everything will be ready and we will make the final switch. But in the meantime, every week there will be new parts of the website that will be opened, new features, new stuff that hopefully is also interesting to you. So that is also a reason to subscribe to the newsletter, because if I launch something new, if there's a new video or a new workshop or a webinar, you'll be the first to know. Anyway, enough about that. Let's dive into the world of movies and TV shows.
How do you not like movies?
They're predictable. Like, the guy gets the girl and that kid sees dead people and Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Not liking movies is like not liking puppies.
They're fine. I just get bored and never make it to the end.
You know, you need a movie education. You need a movication. Now I'm gonna give it to you.
So today I'm going to review not one, but two Marvel movies. I sat down the other day to finally watch the Marvels. I skipped it when it was in theaters because I don't go to the movie theater that often anymore. So I was very, very excited that it showed up on Disney Plus. And after Having seen that movie, I went on and watched another one that I still had on my to-watch list, which is a little bit older, and that is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I'll talk about those two, but let's first listen to the audio of the trailer for the movie The Marvels.
Carol Danvers, prodigal child of the Milky Way.
Nick Fury, my favorite one-eyed man of intrigue.
How goes it out there?
Cold, no air, space.
Captain Marvel, the Annihilator. You took everything from me. And now I'm returning the favor.
What is happening to me? She's entangled our light-based powers, so we switch places whenever we use them.
Strong theory.
You can absorb light. I can see it. And Kamala...
Who's Kamala?
Hi. She can turn light into physical matter, which I have never heard of.
I could totally show you.
She's targeting every planet we call home. I would never choose to bring anybody into this.
You are not the only thing standing between this and the universe.
Oh my god, we're a team.
Higher.
Further.
Faster.
Who's a good kitty goose?
I can't. Can you?
I got it.
I think it was a really excellent trailer, very well edited. I love the kind of the pacing of the trailer. This was edited to the music, to the soundtrack that you hear underneath it. And I was looking forward to having a great time, not just because the trailer looked so good, but also because I really like the protagonists of this story. We're talking about three women. Of course, you've got Captain Marvel, then you've got Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan, and Captain Rambeau, who we only got to know in the television series about WandaVision. And so she may be the team member that is the least well known to the general public, although I think Miss Marvel also is. She had her own more recent television show on Disney Plus that I really loved. But if you've never seen the TV shows, then there's just Captain Marvel, and then you've got two new characters, plus the characters that they are related to. The whole family of Kamala Khan is also part of the story. And but I really like these characters. I was looking forward to seeing this teamwork. The only thing that made me fear a little bit about the quality of the movie was that the movie did so abysmally bad at the box office. It did nothing for Disney. It was a huge disappointment. And but as you know, there may be so many reasons why a movie doesn't do well in the movie theaters. It doesn't mean that it's a bad movie. So I went in without too many expectations, and I have to say I had a good time. It was a fun movie. It was a little bit all over the place. That is my criticism. It was very jumpy. And even though I have seen every television series, I've watched every movie, I still sometimes was a bit confused as to how things would relate, how this fits into the general timeline of the Marvel cinematic universe. It's gotten very complicated. And I can imagine that for someone who is less familiar with the current TV shows and the current story, where the story is right now in the MCU, it may have been more than a little confusing, because there's a lot that is just assumed, like there's this cat, or at least this creature that looks like a cat, but is in fact a very ferocious, dangerous alien who plays a major role in the story. But that cat was introduced in a whole different movie, and they don't take much time to explain where all these elements of the story come from. There's a tiny little bit of exposition, so you get to know a bit where Captain Rambeau comes from and Miss Marvel. But on itself, I would say the movie is confusing, and also, unfortunately, it doesn't go very deep. My main issue is that the overall plot line is very generic. There is this bad lady with superpowers, and she wants to destroy worlds for reasons. I mean, they do explain, but the main reason why this villain is robbing these planets from air and water and sunlight is referring to something that also happened before and is barely explained. And so I was like, wait, why is she doing this? And it's only by rewatching it that I started to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So I can imagine that there were reasons why this movie didn't do well, at least didn't get much word of mouth, much positive word of mouth, because people, I think, were expecting something a little less generic than what we actually got. Now, there's one element of the story that I enjoyed, and it's mainly the message that that the real strength of the Marvels, these three super ladies, is not in their individual powers, but it is in the fact that they can work together. And this is done on a very primary level. They are able to switch places through some kind of whatever event. They as soon as they use their powers, they literally switch places in time and space. And at first, that is seen as a hindrance. You see this in the trailer, but later on they train this, and they actually discover that makes them so much more powerful, because if you don't have a certain superpower that you need in a dangerous situation, you can quickly switch place with someone who does have that superpower. So immediately you can complement the other two members of the team. And I thought they created a nice contrast with the villain of the story, this extremely powerful lady, who, however, her whole spiel seems to be to gather as much power as possible. She wants to have anyone's power so that she can be the sole leader and savior of her people. So it's this holistic idea of an autocratic leader who becomes more and more powerful, but ultimately that constant grasp of power, this hunger for more and more power, makes her super vulnerable, and she cannot withstand the combined strength and the friendship of the Marvels. I thought that was a really nice message, and an important message even in our times, where we see the same tendency in many countries in the Western world right now, where in politics you see that there are certain leaders that are trying to position themselves almost as like autocratic solo leaders that have all the power. No one can criticize them. No one can touch them. They are above the law. And this is a tendency that we see more and more. Maybe it is because we live in such trying times and there's so much uncertainty. And so people kind of look for strong leaders to hold on to. But this story, I think, shows you the dangers of a solo leader who is not held accountable anymore, because you can delude yourself, you can forget. And this is also the history of the church is riddled with examples of this, of powerful leaders like bishops and popes. You see this on a parishional level as well. You see sometimes these priests who are very much like solo entrepreneurs. They want everything to go according to their will, and they cannot stand it if anyone stands up to them. And most of us are also very allergic to that kind of leadership. We like to have a voice in this. And ultimately, I think for a good reason, because we're not meant to live all by ourselves. We are modeled after the image of God, who is a Trinity. So it's always Jesus sees the Father, and who hears Jesus, hears the Father. If you want to know who Jesus is and what he says, listen to the Holy Spirit. So there's this ongoing exchange of gifts in the Trinity, and it was nice to see kind of a metaphor of that here in this Marvel movie, where these three ladies do the same. They at first are used to, especially Captain Marvel, to do everything by themselves, and then they gradually discover that being a team is what makes them so strong, and that requires them to also hand it over to someone else, to let go of your power so it can serve someone else. I think as a general message of the movie, I think that was pertinent. I think that was inspirational. The execution was so-so. I mean, I had a nice time. It's always great to see Samuel L. Jackson, and I thought he was actually much more at ease in this movie than he was in Secret Invasion. He was good, and there were also some funny moments. I always love the interaction between Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel, and her family. And she, by the way, was absolutely the star of the movie. She has so much charisma. She's so fun to watch because the actress who plays Kamala Khan is also a superhero fan in real life. So you can tell that the enthusiasm that she plays is actually, it's just coming from the inside. It's very authentic, and that's why it works so well. There was also an interesting teaser at the end of the credits, which I won't spoil, obviously. But that teaser hinted at maybe something in the future, a television series or another movie. But of course, all this was filmed way before Disney started to realize that they had to cut back on the production of all these television series and movies. And so we now know that in the next couple of years, we get less movies, less TV shows, and they're going to focus on their most important franchises. So we'll probably get more of the Avengers and less of Miss Marvel and, the Ant-Man and that sort of stuff. Which in a sense is also a pity, because there's so much story potential everywhere in the Marvel universe, and the same is true for Star Wars as well. I would hate it if we only get to focus on the big Jedi, or I like the story like Solo because it was so kind of like a fringe story. It fills in the blanks. I love series like the Book of Boba Fett, because you couldn't do this in a theatrical release, but you can totally tell that story in a TV show, and I think it added so much depth to this whole character of Boba Fett, and so I hope to see more of that. But right now, I think the focus of Disney is on saving money and making more money by doing less. Speaking of which, one of their big money makers, a movie that actually did very well in the theater, was the final installment in the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. This movie was a long time in the making. We all know about James Gunn, who wrote and directed the first two movies and then got into trouble because people dug up very old tweets that he wrote in a time where Twitter was all new, and he thought he was being funny by being provocative. But of course, over the years, people changed, the world changed, culture changes, and those tweets that back then didn't really ruffle any feathers now became this huge scandal that led to him being fired by Disney, taken off the movie. But after I think a couple of months, they did rehire him. He had, in the meantime, already been solicited by the DC people, and he was asked to direct a movie in the DC universe. So he did the Suicide Squad, the second installment, the sequel to the Suicide Squad, which was better than the original, and that led to him actually being approached to be the director, to be the kind of the Kevin Feige of the new batch of DC movies. And he's currently filming a new Superman movie. That's going to be the first one of a whole slew of DC-inspired superheroes. I've no doubt that he will do a terrific job. But for Disney, this was, of course, a little bit like, why did we let him go? And when everything was calmed down a bit and he had apologized profusely, they hired him back to finish the work on the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And then lots of other stuff happened, but ultimately, so this movie took way longer than expected. It has been in post-production for years, but when it finally hit the theaters, it was a great success. I hadn't seen it yet. I'm a huge fan of the Guardians of the Galaxy. I thought the first movie was the best Marvel movie of all. I can watch it 100 times. It's for me, it's like A New Hope. A New Hope was to Star Wars. That is Guardians of the Galaxy 1 to the entire Marvel cinematic universe. And so I was eager to see how this trilogy would end.
I'm gonna tell you something. I'm Star-Lord. I formed the Guardians. Met a girl, fell in love. That girl died, but then she came back. Came back a total dick.
Oh, please. He left out some important information, but that is the gist of it.
I always love the music in these movies.
My sacred mission
Is to create the perfect society.
He didn't want to make things perfect. He just hated things the way they are.
I want you all to know that I'm grateful to fight beside my friends.
incinerate them. We were always searching for a family until we found each other.
Are you ready for one last ride?
We'll all fly away together.
Into the forever and beautiful sky.
Whoever it was that you were in love with, it sounds more like her.
Her? That's ridiculous.
Do not bring me into this.
Knock it off!
What? Just never noticed how black your eyes were.
They were replaced by my father as a method of torture.
He picked a pretty set.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I think, was absolutely fantastic. I loved this movie. My emotions were all over the place. I was laughing. I was tapping my feet to the music at times. I was on the edge of my seat to know what would happen next. There are amazing action scenes. But most of all, this movie made me cry. There were times that I had tears in my eyes because it is such an incredible story, focused, of course, on the entire team of the Guardians of the Galaxy, but most of all on Rocket Raccoon. We finally discover his backstory. There was always this hint that this creature, who certainly wasn't a raccoon, had a backstory that we didn't know of that would explain his behavior, his attitude, his constant anger, and the violence that was so close to the surface in this small creature. And in this movie, we see how it all came about, and it's heart-wrenching at times. It's so well done. The character animation is incredible, especially if you consider that Rocket Raccoon was done entirely digitally, of course, based on the performance of an actor, actually two actors. There is the brother of James Gunn, who plays Rocket Raccoon on set so that the other actors have someone to relate to. So he's constantly, hunching down and moving around. Then he's replaced by CGI. The voice is done by another voice actor who gives Rocket Raccoon his recognizable, tone of voice and humor and everything. And then the actor, the brother of James Gunn, who plays, the on-set version of Rocket Raccoon, also has another playing role in this movie, which is also fun. So an amazing accomplishment, but the animation was so good that there were times like, how is this raccoon making me cry? This is not happening. The villain in Marvel was, a dime a dozen. It was so generic. There were so many things in the Marvels that they didn't follow up on. There was this moment where the villain destroys an entire planet, and they never even blink an eye. They never get back to that story. So it's very gratuitous. Whereas in the Guardians of the Galaxy, the villain has a very, very creepy goal to not just to gain power, but it's much more creepy than that. He's kind of like a German, Nazi, like experimental doctor who is trying to use these poor creatures like Rocket Raccoon to experiment upon to create this super race. So it's full of metaphors of eugenics and what the Nazis did during the Second World War. It's extremely creepy and scary, and I thought the performance was just so amazingly good. You really, really, really hate that villain, and when he finally gets his comeuppance, I'm not spoiling anything there. This is a Marvel movie. It is so rewarding, and it doesn't take away all the suffering that this person has caused. And so this is one of the most serious Marvel movies that I've seen, where the stakes are higher than anything before. But it's so well counterbalanced by the chemistry between the various actors, the kind of the quality of the visuals, the music, everything is so perfect. It's an amazing love letter, I think, to the world of superheroes by James Gunn, and also a fantastic legacy now that he's moved over to the other side and is now going to serve the DC universe. Now that I've seen this movie, I have so much confidence in what he's doing over at the DC camp with Superman and Batman and all those other superheroes that I think deserve a different approach from what we've had over the past decade. An amazing experience. I can't say anything else. Final thing I want to talk about here in the TV segment is a tip for a series on Apple TV Plus. It's very likely that you haven't heard of this. And as with a lot of other quality series on Apple TV Plus, they don't advertise it. It's so insane. Apple TV Plus, I think, is currently the best streaming platform that there is, at least in terms of like quantity versus quality. Almost everything on Apple TV Plus is of the highest tier quality, but it's also the least well known. And so they keep pushing out these new series. They're all amazing, and I have to discover them. I am subscribed to Apple TV Plus, and even I don't know about these series. So I come across them on TikTok. In my feed, I follow a number of people that do these TV reviews, and it's thanks to their recommendations that I find these new series to watch. And so the other day, I started to watch a series that didn't appeal to me at all because apparently in the description it said it is about fashion. It's about this, Christian Dior, who is like a super famous French costume designer or women's clothing designer. And I was like, yeah, no, thank you. It's just really not my kind of story. But the reviews I saw on TikTok were so adamant, go watch this. This is so much better than you think it is. So I started watching the first episode yesterday evening, and I was blown away. This is so good. The acting is fantastic. The way it's filmed, it is just out of this world good. And the story is very gripping. I thought I was watching a movie instead of a television show. It's that good. Let's take a listen to the audio of the trailer for, what's the series called? The New Look. It's called The New Look.
Parisian couture could influence how thousands of ordinary women dream and live. But fashion needs a new leader. A figurehead. Monsieur Dior. I keep looking for a great collection to rise from the ashes of the war. Monsieur Dior, what do you desire?
To design the most beautiful women's clothing that ever existed.
Christian Dior ruined French couture, and I'm coming back to save it.
For those of us who lived through the chaos of war, creation was survival.
The legend of Coco Chanel. If people only knew.
If I keep on giving them lipstick and kill, they gon' have to come and arrest me.
Chanel can be very treacherous.
Oh, yes.
My heart is.
Are you happy with the revolution you started?
There is the truth,
My mind is.
but there is always another truth that lives behind it.
Your sister, she's not safe.
Creation cannot stop this.
Turning your life into something bigger.
People need to feel, dream, they need to live again. We can create a new world for them.
There you have it, the trailer for The New Look. It started streaming this past week, and there will be new episodes every week. So this is one of those series that will roll out on a weekly basis, which is kind of really what I like. Binge watching doesn't work for me anymore, just simply because I don't have time. So again, this is not a topic that would seem of any interest to me. Margot in the chat makes it very obvious. I am a guy who has worn the same type of clothing every single day since the day he was ordained a priest. So yeah, why would I be interested in fashion? But I am interested in the story, and this is all about Christian Dior, who after the Second World War kind of brought new hope to society through art, through the art of creating new clothing. If you are listening to the podcast, you only hear the sound. It may not be that appealing to you, but I guarantee you, if you watch this, you'll be blown away. The quality is beyond anything I've seen so far on a streaming platform. If this is the quality of the future, then I think Apple TV Plus is going to win. Because, and especially if they're going to add even like 3D movies and series to sell their Apple Vision Pro, I think in the long run, Apple is going to be a huge player when it comes to this kind of content. And I'm excited because I love quality. And also, Apple has very deep pockets. So they are not very quickly, they won't feel the need to cancel series, to, scrap projects, even after they've been filmed, like what Warner's doing. They are very picky, I think, when it comes to quality. But once they commit themselves, they follow up, and I'm super happy with that. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much for listening to this this first week of Lent episode. I'll be talking a little bit more about Lent and about the relationship with Tolkien and hobbits in the premium part of the show, available to my patrons. And of course, if you want to hear a bit more about my thoughts on how to prepare for Lent and how you can make this time of Lent really count, I can refer you to my other podcast called The Walk with Father Roderick, in which I also use that same analogy between the journey of Bilbo Baggins and our journey during Lent. So if you haven't listened to that, check it out. Maybe it'll inspire you also for the next 40 days. The link to the sign-up form for my email newsletter called The Diary of a Media Priest will be available soon. In fact, I already know the URL. I can just mention it here. If you go to mediapriest.com, so mediapriest.com, it's one word, mediapriest.com, you'll be able to sign up with your email and your name, and then I will send you these entries of my diary. And I hope you enjoy those stories. I do my utter best to make every email an entertaining story that is fun to read, unlike a lot of the other email that is in your inbox. Here's hoping. Talk to you soon. God bless.
Why are you wearing glasses?
Reading.
Reading? I didn't know you could read.
It's time to talk about books, and I am still going very slowly when it comes to reading. I've made almost no progress with regular books, but I did start a book that has been on my list since 2022, and it is the first novel of the High Republic series in the Star Wars universe. I've talked about this many times in the past. I tried to read this book so often, and every time I failed, I lost track of the main characters. This takes place in centuries before the events in A New Hope. And so I felt so lost in this world. There's just so many new characters to get to know, and the books don't really do any hand-holding. They just plunge you in this universe. You don't know who's going to be important in the long run and who's not, and also don't have a mental picture, which I do have with a lot of other Star Wars stuff. Whenever I read a Star Wars novel, I know what Han Solo looks like. I know what an R2 unit looks like. But with this particular time frame, all these characters, unless they mention a particular alien race that I happen to be familiar with because of the movies, then I have no idea how to picture all these characters in my mind. So I gave up on the first book called The Light of the Jedi many times. But there is one big thing that helps me to get into this book after all, and that is the audiobook version. I should have done this years ago. This is like a dramatized audio adaptation of the novel. It's still, the full text, but the reader uses all sorts of different voices. There are sound effects. There's even some music. Maybe I can go to the Amazon page, because usually they also have let's see, Light of the Jedi. You can play like an excerpt of the Audible book. Let me see, Light of the Jedi, The High Republic. Let's take a listen. This will probably have to be cut out on the YouTube feed because of copyright, but let's listen what this looks like.
Part 1, The Great Disaster. Chapter 1, Hyperspace, The Legacy Run, 3 hours to impact. All is well. Captain Hedda Cassett reviewed the readouts and displays built into her command chair for the second time. She always went over them at least twice. She had more than 4 decades of flying behind her, and figured the double check was a large part of the reason she'd survived all that time. The second look confirmed everything she'd seen in the first. All is well, she said out loud this time, announcing it to her bridge crew. Time for my rounds. Lieutenant Bowman, you have the bridge.
Etc., etc. So you can tell that this is much more than just an audio book where someone is just reading the text and you have to imagine the rest. This is very, very well done. This is mono, this sample, but I was listening to the audiobook and it was actually in stereo, which makes it even cooler, especially with the background sound and everything. And if you close your eyes, you're there. And it's maybe also because of the way my brain processes information, audiobooks work so well and are so much easier for me to ingest than reading on paper. or on an ebook. And so I'm now fully immersed in this story, and I love it. And I even think that the story is written as a script for either a movie or an audiobook. It doesn't work that well on paper, but it works super well if you add this dramatization, if you do the voices, if you have the sound effects. The style that I did not really like when I was reading the book, because it's so kind of choppy and it doesn't go into much detail, it doesn't describe much. When you have this audio environment and you have the voices, that doesn't matter. And as a result, the book is much more fast-paced, and it's almost as if you are watching a movie, and it's so much easier to imagine what's happening. So I'm hooked. I'm really hooked now, and I'm going to follow up. Once I finish this book, I'm going to follow up and start to try to catch up with this incredible amount of new Star Wars material that, at least for the past 2-3 years, seemed to be like completely impossible for me to get into. So I'm excited. You can never have enough Star Wars in your life.
Catholics rock! Catholics can be a peculiar bunch. No meat on Friday.
Oh, meat? What do they eat? Light bulbs?
So it's time to visit the Peculiar Bunch and talk a bit about the time of Lent that has started this week on Ash Wednesday.
Man, you guys got more crazy rules than Blockbuster Video.
As I mentioned in the introduction of this show, I wrote an article today in my diary about Tolkien's aversion to Lent. I wanted to write something about hobbits and Lent. That was an idea that I had last week. I was initially wanting to integrate this in a webinar. So I wanted to try out a webinar because that's going to be important for my coaching business in the future. Where I want to be able to teach people. So for instance, do like a webinar about how do you film with your iPhone? How can you create quality video for YouTube, for TikTok, just with using an iPhone and using free apps that are available. And a webinar seems to be a great way to do that. You've got 1 hour, I can explain stuff, you can have Q&A, and then I can wrap it up and post it on a website. And in the future, when people are wondering, who's this Father Roderick and why should he coach us? What does he know? I can just point them to a webinar like that, and it's like, just check it out. So I was I hope to try out this whole webinar format on the new website because I've never done a webinar. I've done these live streams when I'm recording my podcast, but that's not really teaching. That's just me blabbing. So I wanted to see if I could use like a presentation, have slides and everything, and also to have a more kind of structured build-up of what I want to share in that hour. And I figured, well, I could do a webinar about Lent, and I'll just use The Hobbit as a kind of a starting point, as a story, and then I can comment upon the various elements of that story to illustrate what Lent is all about. However, little did I know that it was much more complicated to set things up on the website. Plus, I was also working on a number of other things like the newsletter, which had a much higher priority for me. I wanted to get the first newsletter out on Ash Wednesday, today. And so in order to get that running and to acquaintance myself, to get the hang of the new website, I needed to invest all my time in that, so I kind of scrapped the idea of doing a webinar. But instead, I wrote this small article, and maybe I'll revisit the parallel between the journey of Bilbo and the journey of Lent in a future episode of The Diary of a Media Priest. By the way, if you want to subscribe to the newsletter already, you're listening to this and you're like, that sounds interesting, go to mediapriest.com and send me your information, name plus email address. I won't spam you, of course. And then you'll be on the list for future episodes, future entries of my diary. So one of the things that I share in the article and also what I talk about in the walk is that Lent is a journey, and when you approach it as a journey, it becomes much more appealing than if it's just a time of penance. And I was Googling what did Tolkien say about Lent, because I know that he's a devout Catholic, so he probably wrote about it somewhere or spoke about it or whatever in an interview. And then I read that he wrote a letter to Christopher. So Christopher Tolkien is his son, about Lent and how he felt about it. And he said, I don't like Lent. I was like, what? He's like, I can manage to abstain from certain types of food, but not eating, like on Ash Wednesday or Good Friday when you're really supposed to skip some meals. I cannot do that. My brain stops working. And my brain's the only useful thing that I have. He was very modest there. And so he's like, no. And that's why I never liked Lent. And also, he continues, that he always thought that people who were very dedicated to living this period of Lent in an intense way, he always kind of looked down upon them. This is Tolkien who says that. He thought, these people must be depressed and they're gloomy. They don't trust the goodness of God enough. And, Lent is too somber. It's too sad. It's not for me. It's not for me. And so that was new to me. And I felt vindicated, as I mentioned in the intro, because Lent has never been a very favorite period for me either, especially because it always follows Christmas so quickly. I feel like the end of the year, we have this incredible crescendo of celebration, and it ends with this amazing time of Christmas. And it's bad enough that on January the 1st, that's all over, and people take down their Christmas tree, and the decorations in the streets are taken down. No more Christmas music. And then we start this somber time of January and February, where in this part of the world it's cold and rainy and windy, and there's just no joy. And then on top of that, we get the church who's like, oh yeah, you're probably really in the mood for a time of penance and think about suffering and death and you're not supposed to eat much, and it's like, no, it's too early. Just give me some time. At least counterbalance that with springtime or something like that. Why can't we wait until May to do Lent? I'd be much more ready for it than now. So that's kind of how it. Plus, is also, I think, linked to the way I was brought up as a child, where Lent was really kind of full of prohibition. So we weren't supposed to eat cookies and sweets. We even had to put every time that we were offered something sweet or chocolate bar or whatever, we had to put it in a special jar, which we could only open at Easter time. So imagine, for 40 days we were suffering, people were giving us treats and we couldn't eat them. And that was blamed on Jesus. No wonder that as a child already, that formed the basis of my aversion to Lent. And then it was also combined with we would eat so much worse during Lent. My mom was a good cook, but on Fridays especially, it was this idea, well, on Friday we don't eat meat. So we had these mashed potatoes with carrots, like a carrot potato mash. And that was combined with these fish sticks or fish fingers. And that was it. And it was just, So I still cannot stand it. It was so bad. It's like we barely ever ate Dutch food, but this like was quintessential Dutch winter food, and I abhorred it. And so when I read Tolkien, like, I'm probably a bit like a hobbit. I like to eat, and I like to eat well, and that's why I don't like Lent. I was like, oh my gosh, I already love Tolkien so much, but now I love you even more. And then I was thinking, in fact, when you look at the way the story of Bilbo starts, that is almost a metaphor. I know it's not on purpose because Tolkien didn't like to use his stories in that way. But I wouldn't be surprised if at least some of his feelings about Lent and about, not eating were still kind of in the background when he wrote that intro. Because what's happening? The story starts with this kind of Shrove Tuesday event where all these dwarves show up and Gandalf, and they're all dressed up in fantasy clothes. It's a bit like the carnival that we have in the Netherlands right before the beginning of Lent. And then the only thing they do is eating and drinking, and they completely empty out the pantry. And then the next morning, that would be Ash Wednesday. That is where Bilbo is invited to go on this adventure, to leave everything behind, to leave the comfort of the Shire, the good food, his day-to-day regular, his habits. Bilbo, all hobbits are very much kind of fond of their habits. They don't like life to be unpredictable. And he has to leave everything behind to go on this crazy adventure, which ultimately will end, and he already knows this kinda, in a confrontation with a dragon who might possibly kill him. And only when he defeats the dragon, that's when he will maybe get to the treasure. But why would he leave the Shire? Why choose all this discomfort if you can just have a great time in the Shire? And yet he does. He does actually leave everything behind. And it is very uncomfortable for him, but he grows in it, and he discovers that there's actually a lot of value in that journey, in the fellowship of the dwarves and Gandalf. And the adventure actually makes him richer. And if he had never left the Shire, if he had just stayed in his comfort zone, he would have never grown as much as he does in The Hobbit. And the same is true for Frodo to a certain extent. And then ultimately, the journey ends with this confrontation with the dragon, a symbol of death and destruction and avarice and sin. Not unlike the time of Lent, the journey of Lent ends with the commemoration of this confrontation between Jesus and death and suffering and everything that's evil. And him actually defeating death to finally give us the treasure of eternal life. Just like Bilbo ultimately ends up, getting to the treasure once he is able to vanquish Smaug. So I thought that was a nice parallel. It's, I don't know. I'm inspired by the courage of Bilbo. And also, I read that in the same letter that Tolkien wrote to Christopher, he actually changes his point of view. He said, for a long time I didn't understand Lent, and I thought it wasn't for me. But I've changed my mind, because I started to discover that Lent is not just about sadness. Yes, there is a little bit of that, of course, but it's fundamentally a time of joy, because we're moving towards something. There is this end goal of eternal life that awaits us at the end of this journey, and we're getting closer and closer. So it's just like the weather; it changes from winter into spring during the time of Lent. So every day is a step into this joy, and this joy is not just a feeling in this life, but it's a joy that is ultimately stemming from the promise of eternal life, which is the greatest treasure that God wants to share with us. I thought that was wonderful. Anyway, even if you haven't received the first episode of my Diary of a Media Priest at MediaPriest.com, this is what was in it. But then I wrote it down. I cannot promise that every single episode of my diary entry will be like a mini homily like this, But from time to time, I might do something like that. Let's see. We probably have some other buttons to push, so let's try this one.
I need help.
You need a teacher. I can't teach you.
Maybe the internet has the information I need.
You know what I learned from the internet?
I understand that you learned a few new things. There really is so much to learn.
All right, this week I learned that Dutch, my native language, actually sounds funny to people whose native language is English. I had no idea, but apparently this is a thing, and you may recognize this or not. Maybe you have never heard me speaking Dutch, and we'll keep it that way. But apparently, at least for some English speakers, Dutch sounds very funny. That was the gist of this video that explores, this TikTok video that explores why that may be the case. Let's take a listen.
Well, there seems to be something inherently funny about Dutch to the English-speaking ear. But why? No, really, why? If you try to find a serious answer, you'll just be met with more jokes about Dutch, which is all well and good. But as someone who loves linguistics and is really fun at parties, I want to know why Dutch sounds funny to English speakers. Back in 2015, there was a study at the University of Alberta about what makes a word funny, and immediately that probably doesn't sound like something you could study, right? But no, you can. They asked participants to rate a series of nonsense words based on how funny they were, and immediately there were clear patterns. A word like anatane was nothing special, but words like quingle, wumbus, and snunkoopel were total gutbusters. What it came down to is the entropy of these words, that is to say, how unexpected they are. Across the board, words with more uncommon combinations of sounds, like snunkoopel, are seen as funnier because they subvert our expectations. Now, interestingly enough, the authors of this study suggest that the reason for this might actually be evolutionary. We laugh at things that initially seem absurd or confusing to signal to those around us that it isn't a threat. It's just Dutch. So the paper didn't actually talk about Dutch, unfortunately, but I think, and you may disagree, that we can apply the same principles here. Dutch and English are very closely related. They're both West Germanic languages, and as such, they have a lot of vocabulary in common. But they're definitely not the same. I think those slight differences in what are otherwise familiar words for English speakers, as well as some sequences of sounds that are common in Dutch and less so in English, put Dutch in a sort of uncanny valley. In other words, it's easy to start reading something in Dutch and subconsciously think that it's in English for a second before your expectations are joyously subverted. But that's just my take. Maybe you have some other thoughts about this or about humor in general. In that case, I'd love to hear them in the comments. But in the meantime, tot ziens.
Tot ziens, which means bye-bye. I thought it was so interesting. This is the stuff I love to learn, like linguistics. And this also helped me to understand why, to someone from the Netherlands, which is my country, the Dutch that they speak in our neighboring country, Belgium, sounds so funny to us. We really love the Belgian language. And it's very similar, but they have like these strange, first of all, their pronunciation is very different from Dutch, at least to my ear. But they also have these slight variations. They use words in a different way sometimes, or they have their own versions. Of course, there's also the influence of the French language, because the country of Belgium has 3 official languages: Dutch, German, and French. Dutch and French being the 2 most important languages. And so you sometimes see these French words ending up in Dutch. I don't know if it also goes the other way, but to us that sounds very exotic and very funny and charming. And so it's probably because of this same entropy thing where it subverts our expectations. They speak Dutch, so we're supposed to totally understand one another, and yet it's slightly different, and that makes us laugh. There are some Belgian comedians that are way more popular in the Netherlands than they are in their own country. Like there's this guy who calls himself Urbanus, and he was already a very, very popular comedian when I was young, when I was in school, and he's still at it. I think he's now in his 80s, and he's still filling the theaters here in the Netherlands. In Belgium, it doesn't work. He doesn't have an audience anymore, and even if he does a performance in a theater, people are very kind of subdued in their reactions, whereas here, it's always a full house, and everybody is crying, tears, because he's so funny. He sounds so funny to us. Entropy. I never knew. I had no idea. I wonder if it's the same in English. When you guys hear, or you guys, I hate that actually, that I say that. I picked that up from the internet, but why do we say, hey, you guys? when I know that my audience is at least 50%, if not more, female. So you all, maybe I should just say y'all, y'all can tell me if there's the same phenomena between, for instance, English and Canadian English, or Australian English and English, or I know that how the British English comes across, and for the Americans, it sounds like everybody with an English or British accent sounds like 10 times more intelligent for some reason, and that's probably also kind of linked to our history and the history of these two countries. But I wonder if for instance, if Australian or Canadian sounds funny to you. I know that to someone from France, so a French native speaker, Canadian French sounds extremely charming and funny. And I don't get that, because when I hear Canadian French, I don't like it. It sounds like really weird to me. And for instance, you had Celine Dion. Whenever she speaks French, I was like, oh, that does not sound right. And it's probably because I don't have that same entropy phenomenon taking place. For me, French is a second language. I do speak it very well, but I wasn't brought up with it. So it's probably occupying a different part of my brain, so that the entropy element or effect does not come into play when I hear Canadian French. But I was so surprised to hear from my French friends that Canadian French sounds so funny to them, whereas to me it just sounds like, oh, guys, please. Can't you just speak proper French? I know that this is probably very judgmental of me, but I do hear the difference, and I don't have that association of Canadian French sounding funny. Anyway, let me know. I'd be very curious to hear your experiences when it comes to this kind of stuff.
We are on the cutting edge of technology.
Wow. Well, what does that mean?
Just plug it in. It's going to say, hey, I see you plugged in a new device. And it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build,
Well, all your technology stuff, it just ends in disaster.
But there is one more thing.
I want to talk about one more thing, and that is a relatively old TikToker that I discovered. He was in my For You feed the other day. And at first I was like, why does TikTok show me someone who's even older than I am on TikTok? I thought I was one of the ancient dinosaurs on TikTok, but it turns out I wasn't. But then I started I started watching the video, and all of a sudden it became clear to me why TikTok showed me this video. Because I know this guy, at least I know his voice. It has to do with my love for video games. So let's take a listen. See if you recognize him.
Hi, I'm Richard Wells, and I've been a professional voice actor for 40 years. I've made at least 10,000 recordings and spoken millions of words, but ironically, I'm best known for just 2. You won't know my face, but millions of you gamers really do know my voice, because I'm the guy who says Peggy 18 on all your video games. Now, I reckon Peggy 18 is one of the most heard recordings in history. Just for fun, if you've heard me say Peggy 18 over the last 15 years, just like this video, and maybe you'd like to share it with your gamer friends. Let's see how many of you have heard me. Just give me a like. Thanks a lot.
Now, this was quite stunning as an example of how something so simple as this video can go viral because people can relate to it and it evokes an emotion. This particular video that I just played, in 2 weeks' time, because this was posted less than 2 weeks ago, got 20 million views. 20 million views. It's absolutely gobsmackingly amazing. And he followed up with a video clearly saying like, oh my goodness, what just happened? And he really seems like a nice guy. I also wrote a diary entry about his story the other day. Maybe I'll post that soon in one of the future updates. Yeah, I was like, yes, now I know that is the Peggy 18 guy, and it's unbelievable. He explains because people, of course, ask him a ton of questions. And one of the questions is, how many millions did you make with that recording? Because it's everywhere. Whenever you play a trailer for a video game, you will hear this voice saying, Peggy 13 or Peggy 16 or Peggy 18. He got paid $200. That's all. He got paid $200 for a sound clip that is, I think he's not exaggerating, that this is probably one of the most heard sound clips in the world. Insane. So I wish him well. I hope he's doing really well on TikTok and that maybe he'll be able to pick up a lot of clients. He's got an amazing voice. And in fact, this is his English voice. The guy lives in Brussels. He can also do an American voice. He can do Italian. He speaks Dutch fluently. I haven't heard him speak Dutch on TikTok yet, but it's just one of those voices that you instantly recognize, and that also has a certain gravitas, a certain weight to it. Just like Ian McKellen, Ian McKellen's voice for Gandalf. You know, when you hear that voice, you're immediately transported to Middle Earth. And so I hope he's going to, be able to do well on TikTok, and I'll certainly be following the Peggy guy. Speaking of video games, I started to play a game that just showed up on my Xbox Game Pass subscription, and that is Persona 3 Reload, which is a remake of an original game, I think from the PlayStation 2 era, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, it was a very old game, which I think it's an RPG. You have to fight like monsters in the night and everything, but during daytime, it's basically like a social simulator. So you go to school, you have to go to class, you have to, manage your relationships with everyone, and then there are the fighting parts. Now, there have been various versions of this game. What I like about this version of the game is that they go back to the original. The original had a lot of anime. So they used, to tell the main story of the game, they used anime sequences to tell that story. When they then ported this game to other consoles, they took out all the anime, and the game mechanics were the same, even improved to a certain extent, but they never brought back the anime. Plus, the animation itself looked a bit clunky, whereas the original game had kind of this isometric 3D view, but the graphic capabilities of PlayStation 2 were so low that there was no way you could upscale that decently. I think some emulators were actually able to do an okay upscaling, maneuver. How do you call that? But that was very complicated to get running. So they redid this in-house, and now the anime is back, and it's also remastered. It looks glorious. And they also redesigned the entire 3D aspect of the game, and it's great. It works really well. There at times you can tell that the game mechanics are a bit old-fashioned, but all in all, the game looks better than it has ever looked before, and I'm really looking forward to diving into that game. It has such an incredible reputation, but because of I only played the PlayStation Portable version, which didn't have the anime and had pretty low resolution graphics, and it just never appealed to me. Now that the game looks and sounds so amazing, I'm in for it. I'm really enjoying it. Also coming soon to Game Pass is this pirate game, Skulls and Bones, which has been in development hell for 10 years. I heard there was a public beta the other day. But I was like, yeah, it's just another pirate game. But then I heard it was actually coming to Game Pass for free, or at least I have a subscription, so I don't have to pay extra. I might actually check it out. Maybe it is a fun game to just navigate the seas and board some ships to find treasure. And with that, it's time to wrap things up. Thank you so much for the privilege of your time. Thank you so much for being a patron. Great things to come, as I have explained earlier in this show. Working on the website, working on some very exciting ways to engage the community. I'm not going to overpromise and underdeliver. I'd rather not tell you too much and then show you how cool this will become. I personally am super excited about these developments. It also will be a great asset for my coaching future. And as I've mentioned before, if you're interested in getting coached by me, you know what my specialties are. But if you would like to get coached, and you consider having a budget for that as well, because I'd love to do this for free, but I'm already doing a lot for free, so I am going to charge for that. But before I ask you to sign up for paid coaching or anything else, what I could offer is a couple of free coaching sessions where we can work together and see if there's a match, see if I can help you. So if so, or if you know someone who could benefit from my coaching, just send me a note, send me an email, and I'll get back to you. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon. Have a great first week of Lent. God bless. Rappity rap. All right. I'm glad I got the show done. I'm always a bit tired at the end of the week, and especially after having done so much today. All right, let me take a look at the chat here. Okay, so you guys is gender neutral. Really? Okay. It's maybe just because of the male bias in our society. It just sounds old-fashioned to say you guys, but that's probably just me. Hey, Craig, I will say a prayer for your mother. I hope she's going to do better. Guardians 3 was sometimes hard to watch. But it ups the stakes. It makes it more serious, and I think it benefits ultimately the story. I feel like a penitential period is still easier at this time of the year as opposed to May, which is some of the most beautiful weather of the year. But that's, for me, that would counterbalance it. It wouldn't feel as sad. I mean, this time is sad. Is it penance enough to walk around in cold weather with rain? Maybe that's why I'm rebelling. Maybe many people don't like Lent because they can't eat meat on Fridays, but probably cows and chickens love those Fridays. I bet you they do. The poor fish, alligators, and capybaras are running for cover. I'm so glad we don't have alligators here. The good thing about the timing of Lent is that once Lent is over, spring comes, the resurrection celebration coincides with the good weather and vegetation regrowing. That's true. That's true. Although I was walking outside just an hour ago, and it felt like springtime already. There were already lots of flowers starting to spring up from the ground. It's probably global warming. It's strange to me, Dutch is supposedly the easiest language for an English speaker to learn, and I can understand a fair number of written Dutch words, but I can't understand a word of spoken Dutch. Well, I don't think it's easy to learn, actually. It is similar, and you can probably kind of guess. It's probably similar to me reading Swedish. Like when I read Swedish, I'm like, yeah, I can more or less figure out what is written there, but it's very hard to master. Maybe because it's like the same and it's different. I don't know. The Dutch words in that video sound exactly like words an English speaker might come up with when they are deliberately making up silly nonsense words. Yeah. Canadian English is subtly different from American English, but I speak with what is considered a fairly standard American accent, and I sound much more like any Canadian English speaker than, say, someone with an American Southern accent. That's true. The Southern accents are much more pronounced. There's this drawl, and the intonation is different. They have like different expressions. But it's even worse in the UK. I mean, like it changes every village to have their own their own way of speaking English. So, hey, thank you so much for stopping by. I'll be back soon. I'm going to make some food and then post these shows. All right. Talk to you all later. Bye.